All right. Well, hello and welcome everyone to our September webinar. Um, Today we have Sarah Mazze of Eugene 4J here to talk about some creative ways to use district funds for safe routes to school. Sarah has been at Eugene 4J for 8 years. Is that right? It's 8 years?
It's December. Yeah, almost.
Yeah. So she has lots of experience and expertise to share. So we're very excited to hear from her. Um, so without further ado, I will um, pass this off to you, Sarah.
Okay. So again, my name is Sarah Mazze, and I'm the Safe Routes Coordinator here in Eugene School District 4J. I'm housed in the safety department. I started out in the transportation department. And next slide, just an overview of, or one more, overview of what we'll talk about today. In a moment here, we'll do introductions, and then I just want to give some background on how we ended up with House Bill 3014, some of the challenges that we faced and that others involved in kicking this thing off were facing. And I imagine you have seen the same things in your areas, facing school transportation. And then I will do my best to share the nuts and bolts of House Bill 3014. I am not a legislator. I'm not a lawyer. I've been trying to understand the legalese in the piece of legislation. And so I'm going to share what I understand of it, and then I will talk about how we have applied it so far in Eugene in 4J, and some of the challenges in applying it, and how I see that, and how we've seen that it could be easier to use. And then we'll wrap up with a discussion. So next slide, let's get into, since we're a small group, we figured we could just go around and have everyone share their name, job title, and your organization, and then basically why you're here. What are you looking for funding for? What's that piece that's like, God, if only we could have the money to do this. So, and I'll start out by saying I've done the other piece, the name, job title, organization, but the piece that I've really been this whole time that I've been in this role struggling with is the fact that there's no funding for crossing guards. So that for me was a big piece of my involvement in this. And how about we call on someone? So Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie Van Horn. I'm the Safe Routes to School Coordinator with the Medford School District down in Southern Oregon. And my job title is Safe Routes to School Coordinator. And I have been in this position for 3 years. Before that, we did not have a coordinator. So it's great being able to do exactly the types of things that Sarah's also doing, working on supporting our crossing guards. And I would say a big struggle would be schools have more crossing guards than others, and it's all paid out of the same funds, which is our general fund. So it'd be great if we could get crossing guard specific funding. The staff time would be great too, as well as my grant wraps up, to have funding that could help with anything with safe routes to school, whether it be a walking leader or a planner or something to that nature. But crossing guards, yes, we need more funding for that. Do you want me to call the next person?
Oh yeah, go ahead and
Okay.
call.
All right, Sean, I see you're next.
Hello, Sean Martinez, him, Program Coordinator at Cycle Oregon. Funding. For our Jumpstart program, I would love to see more funding for more bikes, but specifically for them to be kept out at the hubs so that we're not transporting bikes back and forth between Portland and other places in Oregon. I do a lot of driving, and I'd like to cut those emissions for sure. Personally, though, at my kids' school, I would love to see covered bike racks, and I'm trying to push for that for my kids' school. If we could get covers on our bike racks, like many of the schools have in our area, I think that would increase the number of kiddos and families that would walk and roll to school. and reduce the number of idling cars in front of our school at pickup and drop off, because it is crazy right now. There are so many cars. I'll throw it to Becky. Thanks.
And thanks for including pronouns. I'm sorry.
Hey, I'm Becky Newman, she, her pronouns. I work with Sean at Cycle Oregon, doing the same kind of thing. In bringing, mainly we facilitate lending the bike fleets that are funded through ODOT to schools. And we work with a lot of small communities and rural schools that don't necessarily have a safe routes coordinator or other staff putting in the efforts that a lot of you are. And we end up getting these bigger questions as they teach bike safety of like, well, there are no sidewalks here or crossing guards or whatever. So anyway, this will just be really helpful for me to get an idea on what kind of resources can I direct people to when we get those bigger questions on how to expand their safe routes training in their communities with fewer resources. So I will throw it to Lindsay next.
So I'm Lindsay Huber, she, her, and I'm with the Street Trust in Portland and do a lot of work on the ODOT, Oregon Safe Routes to School program. And the thing that I always need more money for is walk and roll. Right now we've expanded out quite a lot of our incentives, but I really want to get more stuff for high school specific, older middle school students. And we're also going to be adding another walk and roll event in not this school year, but next school year. That's going to be Latine focused. So got to get more money for incentives for that. And I will call on Leah.
This isn't actually Leah, this is Linda. I didn't get registered and Leah's at a different safety conference. So I'm being Leah, but I'm not Leah. So I'm sorry, I'm Linda. I'm the assistance coordinator with the Beaverton School District. And I kept trying to get registered under my name, but it didn't happen. So I could be Leah today.
And Linda, do you want to share what draws you to this? What is it that you're hoping to get funding for?
Oh, I would love to see how the funding for the crossing guards happens, because we have funding right now currently through the Beaverton School District, but like Lindsay, we're always looking for more funds to expand programming or help with needs, whether it's, more flags, more vests.
Mm-hmm. Okay. L'Oreal. I don't know if I said that right.
Yeah, hi, I'm L'Oreal Amoroso. I'm the Safe Routes to School coordinator with the city of Tigard. And I'm mostly here just to hear what people are spending money on. I'm only 4 months into my role and just trying to better understand all the different things that we can do in our position. So I'm just here to learn from others and expand the scope of what we're doing in Tigard. And I can't see all the names, so I'm not sure who's still left.
Kimberly?
Yeah, hi. I'm Kimberly Schultz, she, her pronouns. I'm a Safe Routes to School assistant coordinator for the Beaverton School District. So I work with Linda and Leah and Julia. And yeah, I will add on with Linda, always funding for crossing guards and additional things for the crossing guards. And then also funding for our own bike fleet, which would be amazing that we could lend out and do teach to ride events. And also something that Sean mentioned that I thought was really interesting is getting bike covers. And I feel like especially at the high school level, when it seems like bikes are getting more expensive and they're a lot nicer. And with the law that just passed with kiddos being over the age of 16 and the e-bikes and the e-scooters, so things like that are more expensive that maybe kids are not wanting to take to school unless there's a covered space. And also, of course, always as our grant cycles close, to get funding for staff and more staff. There's only 4 of us and we can only do so much. So the more bodies there are, the more work we can do. So yeah. And I think, has Nicole gone? Nicole, have you gone?
Not yet. Hi.
Okay.
I'm Nicole Perry. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Clackamas County Safe Routes Coordinator in partnership with the Street Trust. And I would, second funding for everything. Crossing guards, I just had a principal email me and say, how can we pay, can Safe Routes grants help pay for like the half hour that this staff person could do crossing guard? I distribute a lot of the grant information and they're like, how about for this? And then also just, robust funding so that everything from staff and incentives can be of like decent quality.
Jerry.
Okay. Struggled with my mute button here. But hi, she, her pronouns, Safe Routes to School Infrastructure Coordinator with PBOT. And as infrastructure coordinator, I'm usually most focused on funding as it relates to capital projects. That being said, it's really helpful to know other creative uses of funding that support some of our complementary programmatic activities and kind of where those things intersect, especially as we explore things like school streets or types of infrastructure that can be light or modular infrastructure that supports some like pickup and drop off activities or school streets, which is something we've piloted. So yeah, just curious to learn more about what other folks are doing.
Hey, Guy, I think you're left.
Hello, Guy Fonseca, he, him pronouns. I work with Jerry here at PBOT. I'm the youth engagement coordinator. More funding. I mean, everything. I do a lot of circulation work as well, traffic circulation work with schools. I'd love more funding for infrastructure, crosswalks, signs, all that good stuff. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, did we miss anyone?
Me. I already talked though, so I can totally understand. I already had an intro. Hi everyone, my name is Shane Nevius. I use he, him pronouns. I am the Safe Routes to Schools coordinator for Portland Public Schools, and I've been here about 1.5 years, almost 2 years. Let's go with 1.5 years. And I have a long list of things I'd love to have funding for, including just about everything that everyone else has said. I don't know if any other district does safety patrol versus crossing guard, like student safety patrol. If you do, I'd love to talk to you because I don't have a lot of other folks to get to share that info with. And we definitely struggle with both having adequate supplies for our crossing guards and like getting that for adult crossing guards, and then also having a sustainable pool of equipment for our schools for student safety patrols. In particular, like I had a student that didn't fit our extra large, and I don't have a pool of money to work with to go buy bigger vests. So it always feels crummy to have to tell schools that like, oh, if you need something more than what we have available, like that's probably going to have to come out of your own budget. So I'd love more money for that and for paying walking school bus and bike bus leaders.
Indigo, do you want to answer the questions?
Yeah, my name's Indigo. I am the Oregon Safe Routes, part of the technical assistance team. I work in Bend for commute options. And I know that in the Bend area, there's been lots of talk about crossing guards, but also walking school bus leaders has been a huge challenge for us out here with our walking school bus program. So I'm excited to learn more about all of this too.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone. That was kind of a lengthier intro than usual, but actually it was helpful for me and hopefully will be helpful for shaping the rest of the time we have together, because the piece that I'm going to be talking about for most of this is very specific. And So I will share with you what I understand of the very specific ways that this funding is from House Bill 3014 is usable. And then maybe in the discussion that follows, there could be some opportunity for people to connect on some of the other pieces that don't fall into that and how others have managed to get things funded, like bikes, vests, that type of thing. So, okay, let's go to the next slide. In a moment, I just want to share this video. I had a really amazing supervisor who moved to Beaverton, lucky you all, and she managed to pull together money to make videos regularly from our department. And so we made a video that was really making the case for why there needed to be some flexibility in school transportation funding. And this was coming straight out of COVID when a lot of districts, including ours, were really strapped. I understand that in Portland, there were days when students were just getting a phone call like, hey, sorry, your bus isn't coming today. Here we had to cut routes because there just were not enough drivers. So we consolidated stops to deal with it to make the routes shorter. We had like 50 people at a stop hanging out. Someone pulled out a gun at one point because the families were fighting with each other. So anyhow, here's a little video that is coming straight out of that time describing the situation with the intention of educating decision makers.
Oh, hold on.
Hopefully it'll work.
No, it'll work. It's just because I played and then paused.
It's really heartbreaking to see students missing out on the opportunity to go to school and learn in person and be with their peers and have that educational experience just because they can't get to school.
The wheels on our buses, bikes, and scooters are only getting us so far these days. Right now, transportation funding in Oregon only covers school buses, stipends, and taxi services for those students who are eligible. In some extreme cases around the state, students without accessible transportation have had to switch back to online learning, missed days of school, or arrived late on school buses.
We're hearing missing work, missing school, falling behind in school, and safety.
Safe Routes to School coordinator Sarah Mazze says with driver shortages and school bus stops being consolidated, there's not a lot of supervision and fights are even breaking out.
There were 30 or 40 kids and family members waiting there, unsupervised. It led to conflicts. Again, who will be hurt the most? It's those families who can't get their students to school in any other way. So this is a huge equity issue. We need our students to be able to get to school no matter their circumstances.
Mazze and others are pushing for the state decision makers to modify transportation funding throughout the state. They want transportation funding also to cover crossing guards along with biking and walking groups similar to this Portland bike bus, gaining national attention. Each day, hundreds of kids hit the street safely and make it to school on time.
Having some flexibility in the ways that the transportation dollars could get spent would relieve some of the pressure on the school bus system so that it can provide for those students who need it, who are far away enough from school and can't provide their own transportation. And it would just reduce congestion around the school, get more students active before they go into school, so which we know is great for their physical and mental health and their learning.
Safety, though, is first. Mazze says some schools lack basic infrastructure.
Or if there were more crossing guards, it could be safe for students to walk to school, but we need more support. We can easily solve this problem with a little more adult supervision. I hope that if you're watching this, you can see the challenges that we face and the opportunities that are there and can work to make education of our students a top priority.
Hopefully our districts, we can go to the next slide. Hopefully our districts are in a better space. But I know that in my district, as of a couple days ago, we were down 4 drivers. We're still in a pinch. And I think that is something that we share with other districts around the state in terms of just the school bus system is really straining to meet the needs of the students. And I don't know, I think we just mentioned it in the video, but right now before House Bill 3014, the only things that the school districts could get reimbursed for by the Department of Education were school buses for transportation, school buses, taxis, and stipends to families. So even if a student lives across the street from the school, and a crossing guard could help them across, if there was no way to give them a bus, they'd have to get a stipend, or across a hazardous street they would have to get a stipend or a taxi if they wanted it. So let's not jump into this right now, some of the transportation issues facing your district, but something to think about for when we have our discussion at the end. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So there were several of us around the state who were talking about this. Noelle Mickleberry and Metro, she was working with the principal of Park Rose, Leah Beato in Beaverton. My supervisor was engaged with this as well. And we were all trying to figure out ways to deal with this situation. And one of the things that we thought was maybe we can just get the Department of Education to be a little more flexible in their definition of school transportation or pupil transportation. And that unfortunately did not go anywhere. And so we ended up shifting to this legislative effort, which meant that some of us had to back off. At first, I was able to be involved, and I'll just, a little aside, legal, I think some people, it can be unclear working for a government agency, which most of us do, maybe all except for Indigo, whether or not you're allowed to participate in legislative efforts. And what I learned is that if the school district puts it on their makes it one of their legislative priorities, and I don't know how it works for or there's a couple of us, I guess, that are nonprofit, but I don't know how it works if you're not in a school district, but I think it's the same thing. Cities have lobbyists, there is lobbying that can happen, and definitely education that can happen. But what ended up happening in my district is they did not make it a legislative priority to work on to advocate for House Bill 3014. And so then I ended up having to work on this as community member, Sarah Mazze, sharing my background, experience, and knowledge of Safe Routes to School, working as a Safe Routes to School coordinator in a school district in Eugene. So anyhow, so at that point, Oregon Walks got really involved. And from my perception, it seems like they really took the lead on it. There was a lot of community engagement that was powered by Sam Balto's bike bus in Portland and other bike buses, with a particular focus on that getting bike buses funded, which from a school district employee perspective, I wasn't seeing as very likely. I think this was talked about at one of the last webinars, that it's tricky to imagine the school district wanting to take on the liability for fully running a bike bus like we run school buses. But anyhow, we all worked together and got something passed. So next slide, please. So with Representatives Pham and Neron sponsoring this legislation, and these great images of happy kids taking the nation by storm on TikTok and other social media, this legislation passed. And the basic idea was to expand that definition. So transportation dollars for student transportation could go to more than a stipend, taxi, or school bus, so that they could go to walking school buses, go to bike buses, go to transit, go to crossing guards, and time spent coordinating those efforts. So next slide. And yay, it worked-ish. It does include now the language now allows for these things either as active transportation, or they have a bigger grouping of alternative transportation when you include transit. And it's not super simple. There were some amendments that were thrown in part, sadly, because my union, probably some other people here too, the classified union, was really fighting for bus driver rights, I don't know that they fully understood that bus drivers, we couldn't get enough bus drivers. But anyhow, so there are some challenges. So let's go on to the next slide. One of the challenges is that it's an either or situation. So if you are going to provide a walking school bus, for example, or a crossing guard or a bike bus, you're going to use your transportation dollars, your state transportation, and when I say transportation dollars, I mean from the Department of Education, not from ODOT. If you want to use those dollars, that's instead of the yellow school bus. So you can't have the yellow school bus and then also say, we want to put a crossing guard here. So some kids can take the bus and some kids can walk. That's not how this funding works. It's either or. And so that means that all those students who were getting served by the bus need to be able to be served by this other form of transportation. So that doesn't necessarily include students who have it in their individualized education plan or a medical plan that they need specialized transportation. That's separate, but it's anyone who would be getting served by the yellow school bus. All right, next slide. Okay, so got an image of a bus here to show, yeah, we're still pretty rolling, we're still reliant on that. So some of the other bits of fine print, and I think this is where a lot of the concern from around protecting bus drivers came in. This money cannot go to a subcontractor that's providing transportation services. It cannot go to an employee's time who is not a school district. Oh, can you go back? It can't go to a non-district employee's time. So, like for example, in Central Oregon, you couldn't have Indigo's time covered by this, or someone at Commute Options, their time couldn't be covered by this because they aren't working directly as a district employee. It has to be, you can only spend on alternative transportation, that grouping of transit plus active transportation, you can only spend 5% or less of the total transportation budget. And the cost, there has to be a cost comparison of what it would cost to transport students on the yellow school bus, and then what it would cost in this alternative scenario. And it has to be equal or less than what you would have spent transporting with a yellow school bus. And the yellow school bus might not be an option. Maybe you don't have enough drivers or, whatever it is, but even still, it has to cost less. Okay, next slide. Transit, they've got some extra limits on. So they've got this language around, you have to show that you have to document. They have a list of things you have to document if you want to cover transit costs. You have to show that no other options are suitable and sufficient. And I have that in quotes because that's the specific language. They have a definition for it. It means that the transportation is appropriate for a particular student or group of students based on the student's age. And they actually only allow middle and high school students to fall in that age group. Elementary school students, it's not suitable or sufficient to provide transit instead of a school bus. So the age of the student, the physical or mental capabilities of the student, the distance of the student is to be transported, and the safety of the student to be transported. They don't define what any of those things are other than the elementary school versus secondary. That's up to you, I guess, to determine those other things. But you have to show that it's suitable and sufficient. And you also have to document that that the school district was unable to staff the school buses. So you have to show that you are paying competitive wages, that you made reasonable efforts to hire and retain staff, and that you were still not able to staff the school buses. And then, like I said before, you have to document the cost comparison, and I'll show you what that looked like for 4J. All right, next. Okay, before we do this one, actually, I wanted to have a little poll just to find out if people know what a supplemental plan is. So how familiar are you with supplemental busing? If you could just choose. I have no idea what it is. I've heard of it, but could use a refresher. I'm pretty familiar. or I helped with my district supplemental busing plan.
Okay, I think we got everybody.
Okay, so I will provide a refresher here, or an intro. Okay, so the districts are required to provide transportation for students who live outside of the walk zone. And so the walk zone is a mile from elementary schools or a mile and a half from middle and high schools. Basically, there's exceptions, but that's the simple explanation. Sometimes within that mile or mile and a half, the walk zone, sometimes there is a street that is really dangerous to cross or dangerous to walk along. And in that case, the district has a plan called the supplemental busing plan. And they can, in that plan, they're supposed to identify this street is a hazard. Our plan is we are going to provide supplemental busing. We're going to provide extra busing to take students across that street so they can still get to school safely, even though they live in the walk zone. And then the district is able to get reimbursed at the same level. They get, I think, 80% of their busing costs back from the state, from, in this specific transportation budget. So if you want to, to access these House Bill, to access the ability to use transportation funds, not just on the bus, taxi, or stipend, you have to show that cost comparison. Like I said, you also have to include it in your supplemental plan if you're talking about students in that walk zone, which is going to be a pretty high priority area for, or high opportunity area for providing a crossing guard instead of a bus, or providing a walking group instead of a bus, maybe a biking group. So it has to be in the plan. The plan has to get approved by the district school board, and then it has to get approved by the state Department of Education. The state education board. I think those plans are supposed to get updated every year. We just did the update of ours, and it hadn't been updated since 1992. So if you're in any scenario like that, take a look, because there might be some opportunities there within that walk boundary where it is feasible to get some funding for at least crossing guards, where students have been getting bused because of a hazard that's really close to the school. So the other option is you can get a waiver. The waiver is for, thanks, Shane. Shane says it's been at least 20 years. I'm glad we're not the only ones. Feel a little funny having that recorded, actually. So the other option is to get a waiver, and that is for things outside of the walk zone. So that might be a mile and a half from for students who live a mile and a half from an elementary school, or let's say a middle school, let's say 2 miles from a middle school or high school, and you want to give them transit passes instead. And there's a good school bus. There's a suitable and sufficient way that they can get to school on a bus, city bus. In that case, you need to get a waiver approved by the state. And in this case, that waiver is saying we're not going to provide the yellow school bus transportation. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, wait a second. Yes, there we go. Okay, so you can get a waiver without having to document that the cost is less than you would have spent with the school bus if you're not asking for a reimbursement. So maybe you're saying, yeah, we want to provide transit passes for our middle school students, high school students in this particular neighborhood that live outside the walk zone. So we need a waiver, so we don't have to provide the yellow school bus. It's going to be more expensive, but the district is going to carry that burden. So that's my understanding of what that is about. And next slide, I will show you we're almost done here. I know this is quite wonky. Thanks for bearing with me. Do people have questions before I go further? About like clarification kind of questions, not discussion kind of questions. Okay.
Sorry, I had one that this is Jerry, I put in the chat. So just, I want to confirm that like these, the decisions to exercise this legislation would come at the district level.
Correct.
Not per school.
Yeah. You know, I think a school could talk to their transportation department or, you know, their district and say, hey, we want to do this instead. But yeah, it needs to be in the district plan. So, okay, so in 4J, we were updating our supplemental plan. We wanted to replace some busing with crossing guards. We did have that scenario that I was describing where elementary schools had a hazardous street and to cross, and students from very close by were being bused because that was the only option for getting them across that street safely and getting reimbursed for it. So the tricky thing was we ended up being able to find 3 locations where it cost the same or less to provide a crossing guard. And the other locations, it was more expensive to provide a crossing guard. And so we were not able to include it in the supplemental plan. And the reason it ended up costing more is because that last bit of transportation, transporting students within the walk zone is pretty cheap because so I have this graph here. I don't know if everyone's actually looking at the slides or not, but I have a snapshot of the spreadsheet and it shows for a school in McCornack, it shows the crossing guard cost which is basically just the wages. We didn't actually include equipment in here, although I don't see why you couldn't, but we have some equipment. So it's the wages, including the, you know, salary and the total roundup with benefits. And it's almost $6,200. The busing, it's the wages, and then it's also the mileage. And the wages, it's only a really short amount of time because you're talking about just that it was 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the afternoon because they're making a little detour to get these students and, you know, making an extra stop or two to get these students. And then the mileage is also really short because again, 4 miles a day we had there because again, we're talking about right at the end of an existing route. This is not an entire route. This is a bus that went elsewhere. And then on its way into school, they're going to pick up another 2 stops worth of kids, for example. So it's pretty tricky to make it pencil out when you're talking about within the walk zone, even though that's the location where there's the most opportunity to replace school bus. So then let's go to the next slide. This year has been a really fun start to the year. Lots of irony and sarcasm there. With this update of the supplemental busing plans, some people lost their supplemental busing, and then our transportation department also has new software. And so their routing software is more accurate. And so it's showing some people who looked like they were in the busing area. Now it's clear that they're actually in the walk zone. So quite a few people lost busing. I've been hearing a lot from people who are unhappy. And some of the people that I'm hearing from, or that schools are telling me they're hearing from, are these people who are in the walk zone. Their students live, 0.7 miles from school, and they have a crossing guard to help them across the one busy street. Other than that, they're walking on neighborhood streets, but they're bummed because now their kid has to, walk in the cold and the rain and the dark, and it's far, and whatever their perception is, they're not happy about it. So it's, even though, from my perspective, it's like, yes, you got a crossing guard, students get to move before they go to school. That is not the perspective of every family. So I think, or every student. So I think just having that in mind, if you're going to be engaging in this process, is good to know, because like I said in the beginning, it's replacing the buses. It's taking away something that a lot of people are actually appreciating, even though it's giving something. So let's go to the next slide. I saw Rep. Pham at that State Transportation Committee roadshow and just chatted with her for a minute at the end about what was happening in 4J and how we just explained how we were able to use it. And she said it's possible to make amendments to the legislation if it's not doing what it should be doing. So I think that would be interesting to see what happens as more districts try and use this and hopefully communicate with legislators about how it's working and is it working as intended. That is all I wanted to say about House Bill 3014, unless people have questions about it. And I did just want to share on the next slide one other way that we are funding crossing guards, and that is just for this year. We got a innovative mobility program micro grant from ODOT, and this is for a crossing guard pilot with the intention of showing if crossing guards help or not. And so if anyone has documentation of how crossing guards have helped increase the use of active transportation in your districts, I committed to writing up a report as part of this grant to show both my school district and for ODOT to have something that they could something tangible showing the impact of crossing guards. So if you've got something from your district, please do share it with me and I'll throw it in the report. But oh, good. Thanks, Julie. So we've got funding for just two schools, but it's only for this year. And so this was it was a suggestion of one of the admins at in my district who said, why don't you see if you can get this grant, and then we'll make the case to the board that it should go in the budget for next year. So we'll see, but it continues to be a struggle to get crossing guards funded. And last slide, that's all I've got. And I know we've got some questions and I'm happy to answer questions. Sorry, we have discussion questions for you is what I mean by that. But if people have questions for me, please go ahead.
Do you want to raise our hand?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I was just gonna say, feel free to just unmute and ask the questions right now.
Yeah, Julie. Go ahead.
Sweet. I do have several questions, but I'll limit it to a couple and then let someone else. Right off the bat, the last thing you said was you got that micromobility grant to pilot your crossing guard. Are you saying that your schools did not have crossing guards before this? Like, or this particular school didn't have any crossing guards?
We have 30 something schools, depending on how you count the charter and not. And we have, I think 8 of them actually have get budget for crossing guards. The remainder of the schools don't get any budget for crossing guards. I guess a couple more. And so the rest, they're using volunteers. They are using other staff that are just getting roped into it, but not as.
Gotcha. Well, so at our school district, we have crossing guards in all of our schools in one shape or another, but they are other duties as assigned. So I was going to ask you, how do you differentiate your crossing guard pay? I'm assuming these staff probably have a full-time or even part-time job within the schools. Do they have to clock in separately, or is it they just get a stipend? These are all like many questions to ask, but I think for us, I guess to help us, if you're separating your pay, I would love to figure out how you do that, because we have some schools that I think I pointed out earlier that they have more crossing guards than other schools, and they're all paid out of their general fund. And the theme is it's not equitable, or it feels unfair because they're just paying their staff their wages. So I was just curious how you break that down.
Our the crossing guard pay is lower than there's a specific crossing guard position. And so there are the people who are officially crossing guards whose schools get the budget for it. They might have a, point two crossing guard. And so someone, an individual or two, they might have a part of their pay that is crossing guard pay, and then the rest is educational assistant, for example. So I don't think it's anyone, if you're a licensed staff, if you're a teacher, for example, and you're doing crossing guard duties, you're not getting paid extra for that. That's your time. That's just your time getting imposed upon. Yeah. There's another thing, but I lost my train of thought. Welcome back. Oh, yes, one other thing. So I put together, if anyone else is interested in using this, I did some surveying of different crossing guard programs around the country, mainly in California, to find out how people were. We had the same thing. I was wondering, how is it that these 8 schools get funding for crossing guards and the others don't? How did they get selected? It seemed pretty inequitable to me. And so I created with my colleague Brad Albee, we created a prioritization matrix for determining where, based on ones that what we heard from other school districts. And so we have created a kind of ranked list now of where we think crossing guards should go to. It's not what the district is using yet. I hope they will.
You're saying ranking as far as like which schools need it and at what locations?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we use best practices here, but in addition to that, we do have an agreement with the city, and their rule is if they put in a crosswalk near our school at our request, and they sign it with school signage saying it's a school crosswalk versus just a regular crosswalk, we have to staff it. And if we don't staff it, then sometimes they actually take out the crosswalk, because what happens is I'll just use what I've heard is the statistics show that a painted crosswalk sends a signal saying this is a safe area to cross, and sometimes it is not a safe area to cross. So they limit their painting and signage to areas that they feel is the safest area to cross. And if we staff it, yep, that's the safest area. But if we don't staff it, it actually is a danger to our students and to drivers. So it takes a lot of communicating to parents on, yes, this is a legal crosswalk, but please use their staffed crosswalk, because that's where our cars are expecting our students to cross. That's where our crossing guards are staffing it. And we also have our safety patrol. By the way, Shane, we do have safety patrol, and I'd love to share information with that. But anyway, that's our agreement, and it works out pretty well. It happens to be all the great crosswalks that need to be staffed are staffed.
Oh, okay.
I was just curious, Sarah, when you mentioned sort of the response of some families or communities that lost their busing because they're in that walk zone. And I would, in some of the concerns, I assume even just losing that adult supervision of putting your kid on a bus with a grown-up, probably felt pretty safe. And so that made me think, I wonder if anyone has had experience in trying to creatively use this type of funding to fund a teacher or other staff who leads a walking or biking school bus. And even maybe further stretch might be rain gear, umbrellas, fluorescents, that type of thing, or even bikes and helmets in those areas that are not having busing and or relying on walking. Anyone have Sarah or anyone have experience using funding that way?
I mean, that was the hope, that you'd be able to do that with this. And I think it's going to be pretty tricky for anyone to do that with the limitation that it has to cost less than the bus.
What, to do a walking school bus?
Yeah.
Yeah, you would have to, I would think it would fall under, because I noticed you said it was a planning part. It would have to fall under, you would have one leader or one planner and then a lot of volunteers. So you can count you'd have to count on volunteers to help you with that, which reminds me, I was going to circle back to another one with your hazard in your comparison. If you took out a hazard bus stop and you or supplemental bus stop and you supplied a crossing guard there. In my experience, even our crossing guards that are close to schools in general that we staff, we find that it sometimes needs 2 or 3 crossing guards to make it a safe crossing area. And that's why we rely on our safety patrol. I don't actually know of any of our crossing guards that have 2 staffed. When I go to help, it makes a huge difference when there's 2 adults helping, because sometimes the width of the road is just so wide. You need to have 2 people on the side and then 1 in the middle. And ODE does have a manual that states how you should cross, and you're supposed to be in the middle of the road, which allows people legally to turn into a crosswalk because they just need 1.5 lanes between you and them in order to cross. And that just creates a very hazardous, dangerous scenario.
Yeah, good points.
I think Becky's question kind of leads into one of, oh, Linda, did you have a
My
question?
only question is the spreadsheet you showed with the cost comparisons between the bus and the crossing guard. I didn't see anything that I just glanced at it, but I didn't see anything with like the fuel costs of busing included and the costs of maintenance and the school bus itself. I just saw staffing, as far as I could tell.
There was mileage in there, and what I realized actually in going back through this, I think that the mileage included not just fuel, but what you talked about, the maintenance and the depreciation. But in looking at the legislation again, just in preparing for this, it does talk about it kind of extensively about depreciation and how you can count depreciation of school buses. And I am not certain about that being included. So that basically our transportation director provided that cost. I provided the crossing guard cost. So I'm going to circle back with him for our update next year, because we're not going to do a 30-year update. We're going to do a annual update now. But yeah, I think there might be opportunity to show those costs more realistically and higher if you make sure you're including everything.
Yep, that was the only thought I had.
I think it's a really important point. Yeah.
Well, and not all schools own their buses. So we contract out. So it's probably part of our contract that it's built into the mileage. I'm assuming. I don't know how it works, but we don't own our buses.
Yeah. Sean, you had a question?
I was going to echo Linda's concern, because the $4 a mile sounded really low for the cost to operate a bus to me. But at our school specifically, we have kiddos that ride the bus 4 blocks because we have to cross a ODOT facility, which is Southwest Hall Boulevard. So we have a bus that stops, and the kiddos ride the bus 4 blocks. And we pass by these kiddos every day on or when we do our bike bus. And I'm just like, wow, how can we get a hold of those families, and get them to realize that they can be with us on the bike bus and not have to rely on that bus? It'd be really cool.
Sarah, I have a question about the proximity. As I was taking my notes on the crossing guards, is it correct that we can look into using House Bill 3014 flexibility with crossing guards within our existing crossing guards within the 1 mile from an elementary that they're already there? Because
that example I showed was one of the schools where it was coming out of the general fund and it was already there, but now
okay,
it's from a different pot, basically.
Gotcha. Because I feel like any of those crossing guards are serving, they're serving so many. They're serving the cars that are getting dropped off. They're serving the students that walked, and the buses do direct drop off, but I feel that would be beneficial to be able to use those funds, because that's where our schools are struggling, is to just make sure that all their areas near the school are staffed.
It has to be replacing something that the transportation department or that transportation funds were going to. So you can't just say it's for the walk zone. It would have to be for these students in the walk zone, like that. We're replacing the cost of that bus that was serving these particular students. in the walk zone or outside of the walk zone if you get a waiver. Hi, L'Oreal. Does that make sense? And that, I mean, I think that is an important thing that all of us as in this field should keep sounding the, sounding the alarm on, like, hey, it's kind of strange that all these families in the walk zone don't get support from the Department of Education. They get, through many of our positions are funded through ODOT, Department of Transportation, but other than Safe Routes to School, there's not really so much happening to support the students in the walk zone.
Yeah, and I think that being a hazard, it doesn't have to necessarily be a huge intersection to be a hazard. It could be just a tiny little area without a sidewalk, and that family is kind of out in their own little island. So that's interesting.
Okay, I see a question. Jerry asked, do we know how many districts across the state are taking advantage of this flexibility and funding for the school year, and which elements districts are using most often? I don't know if anyone else is. I mean, it just passed recently, months ago. And so I haven't heard of anyone else using it. I'm interested to hear if others are.
Well, and at the beginning of this, we all had our reasons, and some people were asking for supplies or maybe incentives and whatnot. This does not cover any of that. This is just hourly wage or a service.
Yeah, I mean, it can be for coordinator time. I don't know about, it might be able to cover like crossing guard equipment. I don't think it could go to incentives, but it says active transportation costs mean costs incurred by a school district for facilitating the use of active transportation, including costs incurred for a pedestrian or bicycle group, a crossing guard, or staff time required for coordinating. So it could be other things for a walking or biking bus or crossing guards. And I do think that I think you're right, Sean, $4 a mile is really low. So I think our costs, I don't think we have our depreciation and all the office and staff time. I think there's opportunity to make those costs a lot higher realistically.
I just want to say we are at noon, so it's been an hour. Sean, I know that you've had your hand up for a little bit, so if you have any last question or comment, feel free.
I just wanted to say real quick that our bike bus is completely dependent on parent volunteers, which is me. And like if there was a way to get stipends out to people, to get more parents involved or more families involved, like gift cards or anything like that, that would be so appreciated. Thanks.
And I think the tricky thing is that it has to replace the school bus. So it has to be suitable and sufficient. That means like every kid who's on that bus route, you have to somehow show that they would actually be able to, like, they have a bike that works, they can ride a bike safely. Yeah, that's why the bike bus feels tricky to me. It would be nice if it didn't have to replace. And I see you're asking for a link. I can find a link to the video. It'll take me a moment though, so maybe other people want to take it off.
I can.
Yeah, you can just email it.
I'll be sending out a follow-up email, so I can link that in there. And I'll also include in the survey that we'll send out an area to drop any other questions, clarifying questions, ideas, thoughts about this, so we can keep this conversation going. Because I think there is a lot more that could be said and talked about. So as more districts start using this funding and there's more learned experience for using it, we can keep this conversation going as a group. So thank you again, Sarah, so much for sharing with us all this information, and thank you all for being here. And I'll be sending out all of these things today or tomorrow. So yeah, I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.